Hey everyone, welcome to Ecommerce Straight Talk. I'm Sam Sprague and I'm here with Jeet Banerjee, and we're talking all things e-commerce. Hey Jeet, how's life treating you?
Life is good, man. Can't complain. How about yourself?
Oh, pretty awesome, pretty awesome. I mean, we're already into August of 2021, which is crazy in and of itself. I remember last year it felt like 5 years, so I'm glad we're getting through this. So I want to talk a little bit about yourself. You've created and ran and sold a handful of different e-commerce companies. So why don't you start there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of got into the e-commerce space about 4 years ago. And initially I started out in the Amazon vertical. So I kind of started like Amazon FBA stores and stuff like that. And really the reason why I got into e-commerce back then was I just knew, I could just tell and see that there was going to be a transition in the way that people shop over a period of time. Obviously things like, COVID last year really expedited, the growth in the e-commerce space and stuff like that. But yeah, I kind of identified that. I've always kind of been, a marketer and brander by nature, so e-commerce seemed like a great fit for me to dive into and to be utilizing my skills. So yeah, I started from Amazon, then slowly kind of graduated and moved into like drop shipping. Initially was drop shipping from China, AliExpress, Alibaba, all that stuff, like most of 2018. And then after that, I kind of found some flaws with that model. Obviously, the long shipping times, the poor product quality, not being able to vet things or white label and stuff like that. And so I always loved the concept of drop shipping just because, it seemed so hassle free. I could focus on the branding and marketing, and somebody else could handle the supply chain, logistics, manufacturing. So I decided to just take that model and approach, US suppliers, Canadian suppliers, European suppliers that were making good high end products. And from there, I was able to create a few different brands, sell some brands, and kind of really get my feet wet with all that.
Cool, cool. Yeah, it's sort of interesting to see, especially over the past, I would say like year and a half, 2 years, this sort of negative connotation around drop shipping.
Hmm.
Even though we know major corporations do it all the time, especially to prove product market fit and things of that nature. Um, when when you started out in that world, I guess what was the biggest difference between doing drop shipping and then warehousing and running all your own product?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest difference for me was kind of like where my time investment would go. It seemed like, if I was to do it the warehousing route, it'd be almost like a 50-50 split of my time. And then I think just from a standpoint of, initial capital investment and, some the resources and the staff and infrastructure that I would need was just far more significant. And, being that I was a brander marketer by nature, and I just felt like, if I put 100% of my attention there and didn't have to worry about supply chain logistics, things like that, I would really be able to grow the business faster, achieve much larger numbers, reach the masses, things like that. So that was kind of the biggest thing for me is I was just kind of looking at, what the what the reward ratio would be if I went one way versus the other. And yeah, sure, I'd probably be able to get lower costs and maybe get products out the door for cheaper. But when I look at the opposite spectrum of it, what is the gain? So that might be like, the disadvantage, but the advantage was, I'm able to double down, maybe triple down on my marketing branding. And if I'm doing, 2 to 3x the number of volume, a 10% in margin is not really going to be, a key cog in the whole thing.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah. And so you started out with Amazon.
Mhm.
And what other channels did you grow to from there?
Yeah, so I kind of what I did was I would kind of being an entrepreneur, I've got like ADD brain, so I've always see like new brands, new products, new concepts that really excite me. So I kind
Yeah.
of jump from thing to thing. So on Amazon, I actually launched a supplements company. I wanted to kind of scale that out of Amazon, and I tried like Shopify website and all that stuff. But the main issue that I had with that was that I really had a tough time getting through like Facebook and Google and stuff like that. Being that it was a supplement brand, it was also like 2017, 2018. There's a lot of negative stigma around it. So I kind of exclusively kept it that brand on the Amazon channel. And then from there, I kind of transitioned into some other drop shipping brands and stuff like that that I created. That primarily those brands I'm using Shopify. That's like my main channel. Played a little bit with
Yeah.
like Etsy and some other channels like Amazon and stuff, but I just kind of found it, just being able to control my user data is so valuable, being able to, retarget them, build lifetime customer value, all that stuff. So I'm now a big proponent of, if I'm starting anything, I want to do it through my own channel of Shopify, essentially, and my own website. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest issue, especially with Amazon, is they own your customer.
Mm-hmm.
You don't own them, which is very frustrating, right?
Yeah.
And especially you see a lot of D2C brands trying to grow to other channels, and sort of gather more of that data on that customer. And with the latest iOS issues, it hasn't made it very easy, but
Yeah.
it is interesting to see sort of that shift, especially over the past, I would say, 12 to 18 months. Obviously, Amazon grew like gangbusters last year, right? They just took over. But it's interesting to see, like, your regular Joe e-commerce store brand owners, D2C, retail, trying to break into their own channels, right?
Mm-hmm.
When looking at like products to take to market and scale, like what's your process going through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things that I really look at, but the biggest thing that I've kind of like the biggest thing I would say the underlying factor is you never know until you know. So I'm a big proponent of like just testing
Yeah.
anything and everything, and that's like I think there's a Jay-Z quote where he kind of says like men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. And so at the end of the day, I'm a
Hmm.
big numbers and analytics guy because I've kind of been there where I'd look at a product and then I'd go ask my family and friends like, hey, would you guys buy this? What do you think about this? And they're always like, yeah, this is great, whatever. And then, when it comes time to collect money off of it or run some ads on it, nobody wants to give you any money. And that's when, really comes down to the numbers. But so, yeah, ultimately, I tell everyone, test everything no matter what. But some of the biggest things that I look for is, I'm always looking for, who is my ideal customer. I love to paint like a customer avatar in a picture. And the easier it is for me to paint that avatar, essentially, the more detailed I can make that avatar, the more comfortable I feel with taking a product like that. The second thing I really like to do and get involved with is get involved in products that I truly understand. Like either I'm a customer or I know someone close to me that's a customer, because it just makes the selling,
Yeah.
marketing, and branding process so much easier. So, a lot of people think that, they have to sell every possible product out there, or that, there's a limitation of like, what can be sold. But I've kind of found it the opposite way that, there's products in abundance and you should be more careful with what you choose and why you choose it. And the less homework and the less learning curve there is because you already know the product, and the more you can focus on, the branding and the marketing and the paid media buying and stuff like that, the better it is. And probably the third and final thing that I would say is, I'm looking for new, unique, innovative products and concepts. I think that is something that is really big. A lot of people kind of fall into the trap of, either drop shipping or selling products that have been oversold and overdone for 3 to 4 years. And for me, those products can be very good, but you got to have some sort of iteration or something like that if you're trying to break through the market now. So one of the things that, I used to do early on was I would look at really popular products and I would read all the negative reviews on them. And then I would basically approach manufacturers and suppliers and be like, hey, can you fix XYZ problem on this product here? And whoever would be willing to do it, I'd be like, okay, cool, let's start, drop shipping with that. And I'd kind of sell it as like, a version 2.0. So it's just all about finding like gaps and nicks in the market and how you just kind of can capitalize on it.
Yeah. Interesting. No, I mean, it makes total sense. I think the biggest issue, and even for us, I would say the last, before 2020, before the pandemic hit, life was good, right?
Mhm.
You could grow a company. It was good. Obviously, it was getting to the point where omni-channel was becoming more prevalent, especially 2019, right? Running solo channels really wasn't doing much. But I distinctly remember having so many conversations in 2017, 2018 with brands with crazy products, right? And it's
Mhm.
like some inventor or someone had this great idea for this product, and it fit a need for them. And the conversation always got to, is there a product market fit? And I know a lot of folks struggle with that because, especially as an entrepreneur, you also have this other voice in the back of your head that says, don't quit, keep persevering, push through.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, at some point you got to pivot. When looking, for manufacturers and suppliers, are there, whether it's here in the U.S., South America, Southeast Asia, or China, where do you tend to sort of veer towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I typically tend to veer towards the USA first and foremost, just because from every aspect, it's kind of easier for me if I want to, because I try to truly build like relationships with these suppliers and stuff like that. So if I want to go check out their
Hmm.
facility, have face-to-face meetings, stuff like that, being that I'm in the US, it makes it easier. So that's kind of one thing I really base it off of. And the second thing I would say that's really important is just understanding where is your primary customer going to be located at. So if your primary customer is going to be located in Europe, you probably want to find a European supplier just because from a fulfillment standpoint and a shipping time standpoint, it's going to be a much smoother process, and that was kind of one of the biggest reasons why I had so much trouble with China was, shipping an item from China to the US customer was taking minimum 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. And then during COVID, there were times where it was taking like 12 weeks to do. And it's just, it's not a great customer experience because you're especially nowadays with Amazon getting items shipped to you almost same day, like the bar is set really high. So that's, I'm always thinking about the customer experience, the user experience. So that's kind of the two biggest things that I base it off of. Definitely, my personal location, and then where would my ideal customer be located at, or the bulk of my customers, so that I can create a smooth and efficient shipping process for them.
Cool. Now thinking about that, and then thinking about, if I was someone new who's looking into, create go diving into e-commerce, create my own store, looking for products and what I should start testing with first, what would you say is, because I'm guessing through the years and doing this over and over again in a handful of different times and being successful with it, that you sort of have a simplified process for starting
Mhm.
something out, right? Like a new project. What would, I guess, if you could give some advice to someone who's just starting out, what would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I was into e-commerce, I kind of came from like the tech startup world, and there's an amazing book that I actually read. It was called basically it's an MVP model, which is known as like a minimum viable product model, and that's like how basically some of the greatest inventors and venture capitalists out in Silicon Valley recommend everyone to start their company or their product or their tech company, whatever it is. And so I kind of adapted that same model into e-commerce, and it ended up working very, very well. And I remember one of the biggest examples that they say in that book is if you take a car and you strip out all of the stuff out of that car, the real core product of the car is essentially you need four wheels, you need a steering wheel, you need an engine, and you just need a transmission that's going to, get you from place A to place B. The air conditioner, the automatic windows, the leather seats, all of that stuff is things that were added decades and decades later, but it's not the, like if you just had leather seats but nothing else, people aren't buying the car because it doesn't solve the problem, right? So that's kind of the biggest thing that I try to do when testing a product is at the end of the day, if I'm testing a product, the product's got to be a winner, right? People have to love the product. I'm not so worried about, the box that the product comes in, or I'm not worried about, um, having certain shipping labels and certain things that you can touch up and make really nice. Even from a website standpoint, I'm not so worried about like having like an extravagant website talking about our about us and talking about how our pages or how our website and company works, where it originated from, stuff like that is not really a priority for me. All the focus is on the product, right? If like I'm a true believer in e-commerce that products really sell themselves. So as long as you present the product to the audience, you have a good offer, and you have good information about the product, and there's trust and credibility, you should be able to sell that product without any issues. And then obviously you can increase conversions and do so many other things, just like they did with the car to upcharge the car and to make it more appealing to the masses. But at the core of it, just try to launch and push your product and let the product speak for itself. Because if your product never sells and you've got to do all this other fluff around it, I guarantee you it's not going to save the product at the end of the day. Like people don't care what box the product comes in if they don't like the product itself.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's there have been so many times, and I sort of have this mantra
Mm-hmm.
where if you look at your priorities of success, it's product, market, creative, right?
Yeah.
You have an awesome product, it fits right in the market. How then do you get that conversation started with the consumer, right? And so product, market, creative. And and not only that, but we've also seen where there's awesome products and the company's doing okay,
Hmm.
but then you have the leadership involved that's just screwing the pooch. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic when you see that. It's kind of sad, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so. I mean, those are prime examples of like the product is literally selling itself to a certain extent. Obviously, scalability is always a question. Now, when so I mean, it sounds like you have you like all of us, when we start becoming entrepreneurs, I think the biggest thing initially is like all these failures that occur,
Hmm.
right? And everyone's like, oh, this guy was an overnight success. Yeah, he was an overnight success after 10 years of failing.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it takes, right? And it's like you sort of have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you just have to accept that, hey, there are these failures, but that's cool. We're not just gonna like dwell on them, right? Need be, even if you have a giant failure, hey, maybe I'll take the afternoon and and cry some tears and sit in the bath with my own tears, and then the next day I'm back on it, right? So it sounds like there's some little things in there, like you're saying, hey, don't worry too much about the website. Is there anything else that you can really pull from, like, that you've learned where you're like, I'm not even worrying about this until 12 months down the line, 24 months down the line, or like I've already known from this not to dive too far into here. Is there anything like that you've noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that people kind of have like this stigma or this fear of launching a website that looks too naked, for example, from like a product standpoint. So for me, one of the biggest things I learned early on was that product makes all the difference, right? And sometimes on on a website where you've got 200 products, you might have three products that do like 95% of your revenue, right? And I think one of the biggest things I notice a lot of newer e-commerce entrepreneurs make the big mistake of is that they know what product they want to advertise, they know what their winning product and their bread and butter is, but they still want to launch with 20 other products. And now they're spending
Mm,
all this time, having to source these products, add SKUs, set them up on their website, all this kind of stuff. And the worst thing that they're kind of doing is that they're kind of losing their number one product in a cloud of other products. And so one of the biggest things that
yeah.
I've realized is sell as much of your product as you can. Like, don't worry about adding other products and stuff. Only once you start to see maybe your CPAs are dwindling down or your conversion rates dwindling down, stuff like that. Okay, now it's time to go to the drawing board and see what can we do to get those numbers back up now that we've kind of, monetized and capitalized as much as we could on this one product. That's when I look into adding upsells, downsells. Usually it ends up happening, 6 to 12 months after. Upsells, downsells, what other products can I launch, and all that kind of stuff. And this helps a lot for two big reasons that I've learned. So in the beginning, when you're adding products, you're really just guessing, right? But if I have one product that's crushing it and I've got 6 months of customers, let's say I've got 50,000 customers in my pipeline, I can send them one email, ask them, hey, what do you guys want to see us launch next? And now I'm getting actual validated customer feedback from the same people that I'm going to pitch the next products to, telling us, hey, I think you guys should do this, this, and that. And now instead of us guessing, we're actually taking more educated guesses and following, basically following the money. And the second thing that I've noticed is that, if you sell 50,000 products, it's a lot easier to negotiate with your supplier to make new products. Suppliers hear it every single day where someone comes to them and they're like, hey, I want 50 products for you guys to make and I need you guys to drop ship this. And manufacturers and suppliers, it's not worth it to them unless, again, you got to show them the money, right? But in a situation where you've sold 50,000 products, they know what you can do, there's credibility and trust there. You ask them to make anything, they'll probably go above and beyond to make you even more products with even more complications and things like that. So that's probably the biggest mistake that I see. And I think that's like the way that I've always approached it, is just focus on the one product and then, hit a home run with that and then see what else you got to do afterwards.
That's interesting, and what you just said reminds me of the book Ready, Fire, Aim by Michael Masterson. Granted, when he initially wrote this was like in the '90s, moving into the .com era. So I really enjoyed that book. I think I've read it like 3 or 4 different times.
Mm-hmm.
But he even talks about, hey, when you're growing, even in retail, it's like you take one product, you go to $1,000,000. Okay, cool. Second product, go to $1,000,000. And he's talking about over a 7-year period how you could create a business and then basically sell it for 5-6x its valuation. So I'm curious now too, talking about that and building your e-commerce stores and then also selling them. Um, some advice in getting a store prepared to be sold, um, and not only that, but especially for valuation, and not only getting a valuation, but then maintaining that valuation. Is there any advice you'd give to anyone there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things that I would say. I think the first thing, if you ever want to sell your business, that's like kind of like your end goal. From day one, I cannot recommend how important it is to have like clean books. So trying to document everything from like a financial standpoint, making sure your books are clean, accounting is done very well. All that stuff is very important. The second thing that I would also recommend is document everything. So start creating SOPs and stuff like that, because when you get to the point where you want to sell, that's what every buyer is going to want. So the easier you can make a transition process between you and a new buyer, the better it is. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned from selling, I made the mistake on my first one, make sure not to make it on the second one, is we just document everything, right? And we just create systems and structure, and really trying to create an autonomous system within the company too. So, if you have managers and stuff like that, really learning to delegate and let go, and seeing if the company can run without you. Because if it can run without you, then it becomes very appealing to another buyer, another third party. So those are two things that I definitely, recommend. And then I think the third thing, which is pretty obvious, but I think it's heavily understated and undervalued, is you gotta focus on profit. I think at the end of the day, it's more profit is more important than anything else. I think revenue is truly a vanity metric, and I've kind of seen this firsthand. Just being on the board of companies and stuff like that. Oftentimes you'll see company might have 20 million in revenue, they're only making $500,000 a year, and then you might have company B, which is making 3 million a year but netting 1.2 million. Guess which one's getting acquired for more? It's the company that's making 3 million revenue, right? And so that's like the biggest thing that I sometimes recommend people, because sometimes you just become so infatuated with the numbers and the Shopify sales dashboard that it's just like, let's pump, 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 pump. But at the end of the day, you really want to do your bookkeeping every single month, so you can see what you're netting, where you're losing money at, and kind of really create a profitable business, because that's what people are looking for: profitable businesses with cash flow.
Yeah, interesting. And so, what would you say? Like, what's your goal, sort of, when you're creating this new company or whatever? That like your margins, like your profit margins, like what are you shooting for?
Yeah, ideally, I think anything in that 30 to 35% range is very, very good. And then if on top of that, you can really start to build on that lifetime customer value. I think those are the two key metrics that are, really, really solid. Because as you continue to build on that lifetime customer value, you can probably get from 30 to 35% early, probably closer to like 45 to 50% later if, you're doing all the right things and pushing all the right levers for a few years. So yeah, that's usually ideally where I like to be.
And now, for you specifically, when you're looking to build and then sell a company, is it are you basing it on like time? Hey, I'm going to build this thing for a year and then sell it, or are you basing it more on like revenue and profit, where you're like, as soon as I get this thing to 5 million, then I'm going to sell it? Is there anything like that, or how do you sort of operate?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of a feel that I've gotten in the market is that, if you try to sell a business too early, you're kind of short selling yourself, because there isn't as much longevity in the history of your books and stuff. So you're going to end up getting a lower offer. So I traditionally like to try to sell a business within 16 to 24 months, because that's kind of, especially if you have consistent results for that period of time, that really gives, confidence to buyers and stuff like that. Because there's a lot of companies out there that, they can kill it for 3 to 6 months, and buyers are kind of aware of that. Brokers are too. Even like people that are trying to get SBA funding, stuff like that, going through underwriting, it's probably not going to happen on a business that's been out 3 to 6 months showing good revenue. So ideally, I like to go for like 16 to 24 months of consistent, just growth, revenue, numbers, stability, all that stuff. And yeah, that's usually the magic number.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and even within that too, I think one of the things you're thinking about is the multiplier, right? So you have, like, if I grow a company to 100,000, make 100,000 in profit, okay, cool. Like, that sounds great, especially even at 30% margin. Maybe my multiplier is like 1.2 to 1.6, and then if I get it over that million mark, maybe it jumps to 3, right? Totally dependent on the industry, the business, like who you're selling it to, obviously too. But so I'm curious as if you've seen like anything like that where it's sort of following this pattern that you've sort of seen for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's very interesting when it comes to multipliers and stuff like that. I think the biggest thing that I've kind of realized that determines the multiplier that people are willing to pay is it really comes down to the banks, right? So like right now, for example, for anyone that's trying to sell a business, I think it's the best time to sell a business because buyers can literally get very, very large chunks of money from SBA and banks and stuff like that for dirt cheap interest rates, right? So at the end of the day, the way I look at
Hmm.
it, no one really wants to put their own cash, even if they have the cash, to buy a business or to acquire an asset or whatever it is. If you can get something at like a 1.29 interest rate and acquire a new asset and put no capital out of pocket, that's an exceptional place to be. So one of the biggest things that you want to look at from like a multiplier standpoint and things like that that are very interesting is a the current interest rate for business financing and loans and stuff like that really affect the multipliers. So right now, I'm probably like, from like middle of last year till now, you're probably getting a much higher multiple than you would have, let's say 2018 or 2019, just because there's so much funding available. And then the second thing that a lot of people really base their multipliers on as well, if you're going like the whole bank route, is, based on underwriting and what the bankers and the loan guys and those guys kind of are valuing businesses. I've seen it dramatically change. It goes up and down, back and forth, all that stuff. Right now, it's at the higher end. Like I think there's a lot of like 3 to 5x multiple stuff going on right now. I think like 2.5 years ago was closer to like 1.5x, for example. So it just really varies. But yeah, if you can capitalize on good opportune timing, that's always the best way to go.
And as a seller trying to find buyers, is there a process that you found that works for you, or is it difficult? It's pretty simple to find buyers?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two ways that you can go about it. So when I've sold companies, primarily when I've sold e-commerce companies, I tend to use brokers, just because
Mhm.
these guys tend to have a very large network of people that are looking to acquire, e-commerce assets, businesses, stuff like that. So that's always tended to work very well for me. So using a broker, having the broker reach out and utilize their network to find, potential candidates. And then when I sold my first company, I actually had a buyer that reached out to us and just showed interest in our company and our business and our project, and that's how it happened. So in that situation, I wasn't even looking to sell. It was more so something just kind of fell
Yeah.
upon my lap. So yeah, those are probably I think the best way if someone is looking to sell as a seller is, yeah, reach out to different brokers that are well versed in the e-commerce space. And the biggest thing you're looking for is people or brokers that have an extensive network of buyers. That's what's really important.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you as a seller and thinking about, hey, if I was buying another company, like I have this e-commerce store and it's running really well. We know our market. We sort of created a community. Like we've been growing, but we want to grow that customer base too. And maybe an easy way for me to do that is to buy another brand.
Mhm.
What sort of things would I look for to determine that, hey, this is going to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing, if I was on the other spectrum, as a buyer, that I'd be looking for is probably companies and e-commerce businesses that have like underutilized opportunities. So, for example, like me as an e-commerce entrepreneur, I kind of know what my specialties are and things that I'm good at. So I'm good at the media buying side. I'm really good at generating recurring revenue, generating higher lifetime customer values, finding ways to increase average order values, things like that. And so, that'd be the biggest thing that I would look for. So something that kind of works in my head as a buyer is, okay, if I acquire this business, how much of the money that I spent to acquire this business can I recoup in 3 months without spending additional marketing dollars? Like I'm talking about if this company has 100,000 customers, how much can I further monetize these 100,000 customers in an untapped way that these guys haven't to recoup my investment, right? So let's say I'm spending $1 million on a business and these guys have 100,000 customers and I come out to the dollar value based on a concept, I might be able to make 350 per customer. And now I can execute that and I'm telling myself, okay, within 3 months I can get 35% of my initial investment back. That to me sounds pretty good. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the
Yeah.
way that I look to purchase businesses and stuff like that. If I'm ever in the space or investing even from an investor standpoint, things like that. That's my key metric is how quickly can I acquire as much of my initial investment as possible, given what I already have that they haven't done or utilized.
Interesting. Yeah. No. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. And I'm curious to know sort of what like you're saying, like the due to funding being out there and how much sort of consolidation is happening in the market. Because obviously you do have a lot of smaller companies that were sort of got hit really hard
Mhm.
during the pandemic. And I know a lot of them either were just threw up their hands and said, well, this is it for us. And others were like, okay, how can we sell? Right. And so there was a
Mhm.
lot of companies out there getting great deals because of that. Um, now, now, look, talking about like media buying, right? Because that's really the space that you and I both have a lot of experience in. Over the past year and into the summer of 2021 here, more especially with these, the iOS changes and Apple's, privacy. How has that affected your businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to explain that is that, it's kind of forced me as a media buyer and business owner to really get out of my comfort zone and really, prioritize getting better. Because I think all that the iOS updates and stuff like that did is that it just made an already competitive space even more competitive. But at the end of the day, I think the best in the space are still gonna be, getting the results that they were getting before and stuff like that. So, before that I was probably in like more like cruise control mode where it's like, I know what I'm doing, just keep
Yeah,
running, keep running, keep running. And then it was like boom, like CPAs just went up 50% for me, and it was like, okay, whoa, like I got to go back to the drawing board. Let me continue to innovate, iterate, improve. And that's kind of the biggest thing that I got out of the whole iOS updates. And it was definitely like a journey and a progress. But and I still wouldn't say I'm there all the way. But we're getting through it. And I think the biggest thing that it's really tested me on is you know create better offers, think of better angles, keep innovating your creative. How can you come up with better products? What other offers can you do to increase average order value? So it's been a fun challenge, so to speak. But yeah, I think that's going to be the big thing that I'm seeing out of it.
it's very interesting, and I like what you said there about we still know that these platforms are the way to go,
Mhm.
and it's interesting to we have a handful of different agency partners. One of them does print, TV, radio, and I even know another guy he does billboard advertising,
Mhm.
and you know, I had a conversation with them, and it was like, hey, how's the year going? Like, especially over the pandemic, must be tough, because e-commerce has been growing like crazy.
Mhm.
And he was like, actually, it's been probably the best years of our business. And it's interesting to see so many people taking dollars away from channels that they knew were working before, right? Like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Amazon, and even in retail, and pushing them more towards these old reliable sources, right? Like radio and print and billboards. And it's fascinating to me. Even direct mail is getting a boost,
Mhm.
and it's like it wasn't working before. But now, since your attribution is a little distorted, you're going to say that, oh, this is going to work now. Like it's so wild to me that it's sort of human nature to just
Mhm.
go back to the devil, right? It's interesting. And now thinking about that, and then also, I know you spoke a lot about Amazon. Um, are there specific channels that you look to go on first when starting a new company?
Nowadays, for me, it's just all Shopify. Like that's primarily the only install channel I like to go through, and that's just because I kind of quickly realized the biggest thing that I realized about Amazon over the years is I got to see none of the data of my customers, right? And especially
Mm,
being in the supplement space, I have so much recurring opportunities, so many ways to get more lifetime revenue, stuff like that. But I was just unable to do that on Amazon because Amazon controls everything. And then even worse, about a year after, I started noticing that Amazon would take products like this. Even happened to me where I had a supplement that was just killing it. It was selling really well, all that stuff. And then a couple months later, I see the same supplement with the same ingredients. The only difference is it's got an Amazon label, it says Amazon Basics, and they're ranking above me. And no matter how much money I spend, I can't beat Amazon on Amazon. You know what I mean? Like they basically
yeah.
control that algorithm and system. So that's when I kind of realized that what the biggest negative about being on these other platforms was is that you have no control, you have no like security even. So why continue to allow them to do this to you when you can do the same thing just on your own platform, on your own infrastructure where you have the data control, you control everything. And so for me, it's all about having a fair fight. And I think I get a fair fight on Shopify. Whereas on Amazon and some of these other platforms, if they decide they don't want to have a fair fight, I can't do anything about it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see Amazon how they're the shift initially from the marketplace
Mm-hmm.
model to like this. I don't even know what the percentage is. I'd imagine it's probably somewhere between 50 to 60% white labeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they could see the metrics and they're like, why wouldn't we just create
Yeah.
this? And then just owning that monopoly, and then the fact that they hire more lobbyists than there are politicians sort of keeps them going. And if we look back in time 100 years ago in the 1920s, you had the great AMPT company, which same thing. You had Sears Roebuck, you had Montgomery Ward, and everything went through a catalog. And initially they were a marketplace sort of catalog, right? And they got successful. And then what did they do in the 20s? They then busted out and started white labeling all these products that they knew were selling really well from their catalog, right? And then it wasn't until about 1930 where they got completely disbanded and stripped away because the U.S. government came after them for antitrust issues. But yeah, that's the biggest problem with Amazon and I think I've talked about this so many times on this podcast. Like the biggest issue with them just controlling so much of the market, and on top of that, not even being a marketplace really anymore, right? And controlling that customer. And I think most people would rather not shop at Amazon if possible. It's just the level of convenience is there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so thinking about that, and then talking more about media buying, when you look at starting to dive into the media buying operation, do you generally go to like social first, like Facebook and Instagram? Those are some of the first platforms you really jump on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I would say Facebook and Instagram are probably my absolute favorites to just jump in a start on. And I think it's because, you can really test with very low budgets on Facebook and really get a feel for things. Like I think there's some other ad platforms and stuff where you kind of test with smaller budgets, but it doesn't work as well or it's not as effective. But I think, Facebook, if you want to get a very good picture of where do you stand with your current angles, offers, products, conversions, all that stuff, you can do ads as low as like $5 a day. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I started on Facebook, right? With $5 a day budgets and slowly kind of grinding my way up and figuring out, what offers, what combinations, what audiences work. So yeah, I love getting started on Facebook and Instagram.
And are there any trends that you're sort of seeing on your end from like 2021? Obviously 2020 is over and there's a lot that happened and a lot of purchase patterns and behaviors that shifted and changed over that period, and even into this year that's changed too. But are there any trends that you're sort of looking at moving into like Q4 and then Q1 of 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest trend that I've kind of noticed, and this was kind of going out of 2020 into 2021, was that the offers that really work, really long term that I've seen, really tend to perform very, very well on as broad of audiences as you can get, right? So when I first started on Facebook and stuff like that, it was always like, if I was to do an ad with no interest, for example, I would be, just burning money. And then I slowly started seeing how good that their algorithm truly was. And the more that you allow their algorithm to operate as its own entity and just kind of like, not put a bunch of restrictions on them, how good it gets. That was very, very interesting for me. So kind of one of the biggest things that I like to do early on nowadays is I like to test, I'm kind of able to get a very good feel for the longevity of an offer and a product and stuff like that right off the bat by testing on very broad audiences, because sometimes I'll test on a very niche audience and then I'll try to go broad from there and it just doesn't end up working. Whereas vice versa, when I test on a broad audience, if it doesn't end up working nowadays, I'll kind of just cut that offer, cut that angle, and then move to the next one. But if it starts to work, then I'm like, okay, you know what, I'm on to something. And I think that's been the biggest challenge that I've seen with Facebook, especially with iOS updates and stuff, is like the longevity of something lasting has really shortened. I feel like before, I could do like a niche audience of 1.5 million people, and that offer could last months with a reasonable sized budget. And then I think as iOS 14 and stuff kicked in, now it's like a 1.5 million audience. Man, I'll be lucky if that lasts me like 3 to 5 days before it starts to, really start to hamper in results. So I think this is like across the board for all the social media platforms. I think they are understanding like, our robotic systems and AI technology, it makes for better advertisers than actual humans and people do. So the more that they can take control of that, I think the more, you know, the better results you're going to see. And I think it's just going to come down to, the smart marketers are just going to like slowly say, hey, take control, take control. We're just going to feed the machine kind of thing rather than controlling the machine.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see sort of these shifts. Like you're saying, some more broad audiences, but not only that, but it seems to be too. Every brand is exponentially more different
Mm-hmm.
than they were before, right? If you take me back 12 months, I could do the same strategy with just about everyone, and it worked, right? And there's small little things that you would shift and change, but for the most part, it all worked.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as every brand is, every account's different. Everything is so different. Some accounts you might run ABO and that works amazing. As soon as you run CBO, it just dies,
Yeah.
right? Others, you use interest groups, which we haven't used in years, and now we're using them all over the place, right? More broad audiences, and then being able to dissect those broad audiences as well, and even stacking your retargeting, because we know with the attribution levels and the pixel tracking, and hopefully everyone's connected to the API, but there's just so many issues there. On top of that, we've also noticed we've actually ran a test because we knew iOS was coming for about a year,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what we did is we got half of our clients together, and basically they all agreed that we would continue spending the exact same that we have been over the past year into this year. Others wanted to make adjustments due to performance that they were seeing in the platform, right? So a lot of them spending less. Whereas we're spending the same, no matter what comes through, right? For the past about 3 months, no matter what results we see, we're just keep pushing through. But how we measure is with our marketing efficiency rate and our MER on the back end. So looking at overall revenue divided by overall spend across all channels, right? What does that look like? And in fact, it has stayed the same. It has followed the exact same trajectory as it did last year, which is so crazy to me, especially in a year which is a little different too, right? Where we actually have a back to school season now this year, as opposed to
Yeah.
last year. I think retailers lost something like 60%, and all that went to Amazon. But it's so interesting to sort of see all these factors come into place, and I think over the long term, we'll sort of get back into better shape. I think right now it's just a lack of trust, right? It's like, how do I know? We've had it so good for the past
Mm-hmm.
however many years, right? We get to see everything in front of us, and now it's like, kind of making guesstimations on what we should do next. And so, through that process too, I think moving into the rest of the year, that's really what it's going to be. And so Q4 is going to be interesting because big brands are just going to unload a ton of money and a ton of cash. So you kind of have to keep up. But hey, I wanted to thank you, Jeet, for coming on today. How can people find you if they want to reach out and chat with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say I'm most active probably on Instagram. So if people want to just reach out to me on Instagram, my personal Instagram is at the Jeet Banerjee, which is spelled TheJeetBanerjee. And yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Awesome, man. Hey, it was great talking to you. All right, everyone. Talk to y'all later. Bye.